The ancestral house stood like a forgotten god at the edge of the village, its domed roof arched with vines, its columns cracked like tired bones, and its great wooden doors groaning with every wind. Nari had come there at 7, and now she was 17, and the house still hadn't let her sleep a full night in peace. Its walls whispered. Its windows wept. But more than anything else there was the door, the one at the end of the hallway. It was a tall door, black and smooth as tar, with no handle, no lock, just a seam in the stone that said it could open if it wanted to. Her aunt, who insisted on being called Mistress Salome, rather than anything familial, had told her the rules on her first night. No visitors. No lanterns after midnight. No entering the cellar unless summoned. And never, under any circumstance, open the door at the end of the hall. It holds what must not be seen, she had said in that gravelly voice of hers, the one that seemed to scrape the candlelight thinner when she spoke. Some things keep their shape because they are not touched. Understand? Nari had nodded. Of course she understood. She was a quiet child, observant, the sort that folded her hands in her lap and memorized the cracks in the ceiling rather than speak. Her aunt didn't seem to like voices, especially not young ones. So Nari became a shadow in the halls, moving when spoken to, eating when told, reading only the books in the East Library and only by the window with the broken glass. But the door, oh the door. It began humming when she was 12. Not always, not loudly. Just a low, steady vibration that seemed to slip into her bones as she walked past it. Sometimes if she pressed her ear close she could hear breathing. Other times it sounded like weeping. Once, just once, she could have sworn she heard her mother's voice saying her name. There were no pictures of her mother in the house. Nari had asked once quietly, "Where is my mother's portrait?" Mistress Salome had paused over her needlework and answered, "Dead women don't need faces." And that was the end of it. So Nari learned not to ask. But at night, when the wind hissed under the roof tiles and her candle nearly went out without warning, she'd stare at the ceiling and whisper her mother's name like a spell. Mirani. 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 She didn't know if it helped, but the dark always seemed less cold after that. As she grew, so did the house's strange rhythms. Walls that shifted slightly when she turned corners. Doors that opened on their own, then slammed when she tried to pass. A clock in the west wing that hadn't worked in years, but rang 13 bells every solstice. Still, it was the black door that kept her heart on edge. By 15 she had dreams about it. In them, she stood before the door barefoot, the floor slick with water, the air so cold her breath came in clouds. Behind the door, someone, or something, called her name. Not in a rush. Not in anger. Just called. As if they'd been waiting. Mistress Salome must have known something was happening, for that year she took to locking Nari in her room at night. "For your safety," she'd say, and leave the food tray on the floor like she were feeding a wild beast. Nari never complained. But she began to watch. And wait. It was during the third winter, the one where snow came up to the windows, that Nari first touched the black door. It was late, the hour when owls no longer hooted and even the mice had stilled. She'd picked the lock to her room using a hairpin, moving with the silence of someone who had no one left to trust. The hall stretched before her like a mouth, its red rug worn to threads, its oil lamps dead. At the far end, the black door stood still, its presence so solid it felt like a second heartbeat in the house. She walked toward it, her nightgown brushing her ankles, her hands trembling. When she laid her palm flat against it, the cold bit her skin like teeth. Her breath hitched. The humming was there, louder than ever. A strange melody woven into the vibration, like something old and sorrowful was being sung in reverse. And beneath it, unmistakably, her name. Nari. She jerked her hand back. Ran to her room. Didn't sleep. But she returned the next night. And the next. Always just to touch. Never to push. She didn't know what she wanted, only that the door was part of her now, as familiar as her own shadow. When Mistress Salome caught her one morning with frost on her fingertips, she said nothing, just watched with those sharp gray eyes and muttered something in a language Nari had never heard before. That spring the house began to change more violently. Books vanished from shelves. Paintings peeled themselves off the walls. One night, Nari woke to find her sheets soaked through, her bed floating 2 inches above the floor. Mistress Salome grew pale, silent. She spent whole days muttering in the cellar, and when she came up, she'd sometimes stagger and bleed from the ears. "You're calling it," she whispered to Nari once, voice cracked and thin. "You're waking it up." "I haven't done anything," Nari replied, but the words rang hollow even to her. On the night of her 17th birthday, the humming became a song. It rose from the black door in waves, clear, high, human. A woman's voice. The song had no words but Nari understood it. It was a lullaby, a promise, a plea. Mistress Salome burst into Nari's room before dawn. "You opened it," she spat. "What did you let out?" "I didn't open anything," Nari cried. "I swear." But the house didn't care. It groaned and shuddered as if in birth. The sky outside turned a shade of blue Nari had never seen, too deep, too endless. From every corner the door's melody wove itself through the walls. Mistress Salome slapped her. Art. The first time she had ever touched Nari with anything but cold indifference. "You don't know what it cost to seal it away," she said. "To keep it quiet." "What is it?" Nari whispered, eyes burning. "It's her." "Her who?" But the old woman just turned and walked away. That night, Nari made her choice. She waited until the house had fallen into its usual haunted hush. She took the candle, the key she'd stolen from Salami's robe, and walked the long hallway. The door looked the same, but the air shimmered around it now. Something waited. Something new. She unlocked it. The door didn't swing or creak. It dissolved, vanishing like mist. Beyond it was not a room but a vast space lit from nowhere, the floor an obsidian mirror. In the center stood a woman. Her back was turned, her hair long and silver, her dress made of stars. When she turned, Nari stopped breathing. It was her mother. Or someone who wore her mother's face. "You came?" the woman said. "Who are you?" Nari asked, stepping forward. The woman's smile was slow, sad. "I was sealed here to protect you. They thought I was a danger. They thought if I sang you'd hear. And if you heard you'd come." "What danger?" "I remember who I was now," the woman whispered. "And who you are." The mirror floor began to crack, not with violence but like an egg hatching. Light pulsed from the seams. Behind Nari the house shook. "You are not their child, Nari. You are mine. You are of the song. Of the dark before light. I sang you into the world before they silenced me." The ancestral house stood like a forgotten god at the edge of the village, its domed roof arched with vines, its columns cracked like tired bones, and its great wooden doors groaning with every wind. Nari had come there at 7, and now she was 17, and the house still hadn't let her sleep a full night in peace. Its walls whispered. Its windows wept. But more than anything else there was the door, the one at the end of the hallway. It was a tall door, black and smooth as tar, with no handle, no lock, just a seam in the stone that said it could open if it wanted to. Her aunt, who insisted on being called Mistress Salome, rather than anything familial, had told her the rules on her first night. No visitors. No lanterns after midnight. No entering the cellar unless summoned. And never, under any circumstance, open the door at the end of the hall. "It holds what must not be seen," she had said in that gravelly voice of hers, the one that seemed to scrape the candlelight thinner when she spoke. "Some things keep their shape because they are not touched. Understand?" Nari had nodded. Of course she understood. She was a quiet child, observant, the sort that folded her hands in her lap and memorized the cracks in the ceiling rather than speak. Her aunt didn't seem to like voices, especially not young ones. So Nari became a shadow in the halls, moving when spoken to, eating when told, reading only the books in the East Library and only by the window with the broken glass. But the door, oh the door. It began humming when she was 12. Not always, not loudly. Just a low, steady vibration that seemed to slip into her bones as she walked past it. Sometimes if she pressed her ear close she could hear breathing. Other times it sounded like weeping. Once, just once, she could have sworn she heard her mother's voice saying her name. There were no pictures of her mother in the house. Nari had asked once quietly, "Where is my mother's portrait?" Mistress Salome had paused over her needlework and answered, "Dead women don't need faces." And that was the end of it. So Nari learned not to ask. But at night, when the wind hissed under the roof tiles and her candle nearly went out without warning, she'd stare at the ceiling and whisper her mother's name like a spell. Mirani. 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 She didn't know if it helped, but the dark always seemed less cold after that. As she grew, so did the house's strange rhythms. Walls that shifted slightly when she turned corners. Doors that opened on their own, then slammed when she tried to pass. A clock in the west wing that hadn't worked in years, but rang 13 bells every solstice. Still, it was the black door that kept her heart on edge. By 15 she had dreams about it. In them, she stood before the door barefoot, the floor slick with water, the air so cold her breath came in clouds. Behind the door, someone, or something, called her name. Not in a rush. Not in anger. Just called. As if they'd been waiting. Mistress Salome must have known something was happening, for that year she took to locking Nari in her room at night. "For your safety," she'd say, and leave the food tray on the floor like she were feeding a wild beast. Nari never complained. But she began to watch. And wait. It was during the third winter, the one where snow came up to the windows, that Nari first touched the black door. It was late, the hour when owls no longer hooted and even the mice had stilled. She'd picked the lock to her room using a hairpin, moving with the silence of someone who had no one left to trust. The hall stretched before her like a mouth, its red rug worn to threads, its oil lamps dead. At the far end, the black door stood still, its presence so solid it felt like a second heartbeat in the house. She walked toward it, her nightgown brushing her ankles, her hands trembling. When she laid her palm flat against it, the cold bit her skin like teeth. Her breath hitched. The humming was there, louder than ever. A strange melody woven into the vibration, like something old and sorrowful was being sung in reverse. And beneath it, unmistakably, her name. Nari. She jerked her hand back. Ran to her room. Didn't sleep. But she returned the next night. And the next. Always just to touch. Never to push. She didn't know what she wanted, only that the door was part of her now, as familiar as her own shadow. When Mistress Salome caught her one morning with frost on her fingertips, she said nothing, just watched with those sharp gray eyes and muttered something in a language Nari had never heard before. That spring the house began to change more violently. Books vanished from shelves. Paintings peeled themselves off the walls. One night, Nari woke to find her sheets soaked through, her bed floating 2 inches above the floor. Mistress Salome grew pale, silent. She spent whole days muttering in the cellar, and when she came up, she'd sometimes stagger and bleed from the ears. "You're calling it," she whispered to Nari once, voice cracked and thin. "You're waking it up." "I haven't done anything," Nari replied, but the words rang hollow even to her. On the night of her 17th birthday, the humming became a song. It rose from the black door in waves, clear, high, human. A woman's voice. The song had no words but Nari understood it. It was a lullaby, a promise, a plea. Mistress Salome burst into Nari's room before dawn. "You opened it," she spat. "What did you let out?" "I didn't open anything." Nari cried. "I swear." But the house didn't care. It groaned and shuddered as if in birth. The sky outside turned a shade of blue Nari had never seen, too deep, too endless. From every corner the door's melody wove itself through the walls. Mistress Salome slapped her. Art. The first time she had ever touched Nari with anything but cold indifference. "You don't know what it cost to seal it away," she said. "To keep it quiet." "What is it?" Nari whispered, eyes burning. "It's her." "Her who?" But the old woman just turned and walked away. That night, Nari made her choice. She waited until the house had fallen into its usual haunted hush. She took the candle, the key she'd stolen from Salami's robe, and walked the long hallway. The door looked the same, but the air shimmered around it now. Something waited. Something new. She unlocked it. The door didn't swing or creak. It dissolved, vanishing like mist. Beyond it was not a room but a vast space lit from nowhere, the floor an obsidian mirror. In the center stood a woman. Her back was turned, her hair long and silver, her dress made of stars. When she turned, Nari stopped breathing. It was her mother. Or someone who wore her mother's face. "You came?" the woman said. "Who are you?" Nari asked, stepping forward. The woman's smile was slow, sad. "I was sealed here to protect you. They thought I was a danger. They thought if I sang you'd hear. And if you heard you'd come." "What danger?" "I remember who I was now," the woman whispered. "And who you are." The mirror floor began to crack, not with violence but like an egg hatching. Light pulsed from the seams. Behind Nari the house shook. "You are not their child, Nari. You are mine. You are of the song. Of the dark before light. I sang you into the world before they silenced me." Nari's hands trembled. "What does that mean?" "It means you must choose." "Choose what?" The woman held out her hand. "To come with me. To remember. Or to stay here and forget again." Behind her, the door began reforming. Mistress Salami's voice rang down the hall, desperate, broken. Don't listen to her. That thing is not your mother." But Nari's heart was still. She reached forward. Her fingers touched the woman's hand. And the house exploded into light. The door gave way with no sound. It didn't creak or groan or resist like old doors should. It simply parted for Nari as if it had been waiting, as if it recognized her now. The key was no longer needed. It had already done its part. Now the house, this living, breathing place, invited her inward. She crossed the threshold. Mist gathered at her feet. Cold, dense but dry like the fog that rose from the gray fields in winter. Her breath puffed in front of her and she turned slowly, expecting darkness. Instead, the room glowed faintly, silver light with no source. She was inside a perfect circle, walls made entirely of mirrors. Tall, arched panels lined the curved walls, stretching from the floor to the unseen ceiling, each one framed in iron ivy and velvet wrought. Dust lay thick along the floor, but not a single speck marred the mirrors themselves. They were pristine. At first she thought they didn't reflect anything. Then she looked closer. The mirror directly before her showed her face, but not as it was. Her eyes were sunken, cheeks hollow, hair soaked as if she'd been crying in the rain. She leaned in. The girl in the mirror mirrored her, but her expression was not quite the same. This Nari looked afraid. She stepped to the right. Another mirror. This one showed her older, much older. Wrinkles clung to her skin like secrets, her shoulders stooped. But her eyes remained the same, still full of the storm she now carried in her chest. The older Nari stared back, lips parted slightly, like she was on the verge of saying something important. The third mirror showed her smiling. Not a small smile, not her usual polite curving of the lips, but a wide, almost joyful grin. There was something red on her mouth. Her chin. A trail of blood dripping down her throat. She was dressed in something unfamiliar, dark, ceremonial, too grand for anything she had ever worn. Her eyes sparkled with something close to hunger. Nari staggered back from that one, pressing a hand to her own mouth. Another mirror, this one showing her curled in a corner, weeping into her palms. Her dress was torn. Her fingers bruised. The image didn't look up even when she stared into it. It shook silently, rocking. Every mirror showed her, but not her. Some images were close, some impossibly distant. In one she was dancing with someone she couldn't see, just shadows wrapped around her waist. In another she lay asleep in the grass, covered in leaves. In another she stood in flames, not burning, just watching the fire consume everything behind her. She moved in a circle, trembling. Some versions of herself reached out when she passed. Some turned away. Some smiled too wide. But none of them reflected her truly. Not one followed her movements in real time. And the more she watched, the more she felt it. A growing pull from the center of the room like a heartbeat beneath the stone floor. She stopped. The silence pressed in around her. Not a breath of wind. Not a whisper from the walls. She stepped toward the center, unsure what she was looking for, unsure whether she was still in the same world or beneath it. When she turned around, one mirror had changed. It was the same panel, the same frame. But now, the Nari inside it wasn't doing anything strange. She wasn't older or younger. She wasn't smiling with blood or crying into her sleeves. She stood exactly where Nari stood. Her dress was the same. Her hair fell the same way. But she was moving just a little too slow. Nari raised her hand. The mirror Nari followed, late. She frowned. Moved her head left, then right. The reflection copied her, a beat behind. She took a deep breath. The glass fogged slightly in front of the mirrored mouth, but not hers. She stepped forward. Close enough to see the tiny veins in her own eyes. Close enough to see how the reflection's pupils didn't shrink with the light from her candle. Close enough to know, this was no ordinary mirror. She placed her palm flat against the glass. Her skin was cold against it. The mirror Nari did the same. Except, her fingers didn't meet. The mirrored hand pressed back but a half-inch to the right. Nari's heart stuttered. She adjusted her fingers. The reflection didn't. It stared at her now, face blank, but its eyes were aware. Then, in one sharp motion, the mirror Nari smiled. Not her smile. Not anything she had ever seen in her own face. It was not her. The hand on the other side of the glass began to press harder. The tips whitened against the glass. Then the wrist. The forearm. The arm. The glass didn't crack. It didn't resist. The arm of the reflection was pushing through. Nari gasped and stumbled back, but the mirror image kept moving, reaching out of the glass now, elbow bending as it slid from the surface like the mirror had become water. She turned to run, but the door was gone. There was only the circle of mirrors now. Endless, spiraling, no edges, no corners. And the reflection climbed out. Nari screamed. The reflection stood before her now, breathing. Her same height. Her same features. But the expression was ancient. Patient. Curious. You don't recognize me, it said, voice like her own but wrong. Lower. More rounded. Like someone humming beneath a veil. You're not me, Nari whispered. I'm the part that wasn't allowed to be you. It stepped closer. You left me here, it said. Every time you walked by. Every time you looked away. You're not real. Oh, I'm realer than you, the reflection said, stepping closer still. You're the one they groomed. The obedient girl. The one who learned how to smile with her mouth closed. But me? I'm the scream. The tear. The storm you swallowed. Nari backed into one of the mirrors. The version behind her was a Nari wearing a blindfold, hands tied with gold thread. I didn't choose this, she said. No. But you never fought it either. The reflection raised a hand. Nari braced for impact. But the hand just hovered. Then gently, fingers splayed, it touched her cheek. You feel it now, don't you? It whispered. The pull. The split. What do you want? To remember. To merge. To stop being shadows on glass. I won't let you take me. The reflection tilted its head. Take you? You're the one standing in my room. Something in the air shifted. The mirrors around them began to hum, vibrating softly. The different versions of herself inside them began to move in unison, hands rising to the glass, pressing against it. Dozens of Nairis. All watching. Some smiling. Some weeping. Some awaiting. I didn't ask for this, Nari said again, but the words sounded hollow now. The reflection stepped back. Then leave, it said simply. The door's behind you. Nari turned. And there it was, the way out. The black door open, pulsing. She could run. She could wake up and pretend none of it happened. But her feet didn't move. Her eyes turned back to the center of the room, where her other self waited. I remember the song, Nari said softly. It's been in my head for days. The reflection smiled again. You were always meant to hear it. I don't want to forget again. You won't. Will it hurt? No, said the reflection, but it will change you. Nari stepped forward. The mirrors flickered. Every version of her stood still now, watching as she walked to the center, toe to toe with herself. The reflection held out both hands. And this time, when Nari placed hers against them, the glass didn't come between them. They breathed in sync, moved in sync. And when they closed their eyes, Nari began to measure time differently now, not in hours or days, not in the movements of the sun or the ringing of the bells in the chapel below, but in glances, in stolen seconds, in the moments when the glass gave her something that it shouldn't. At first it was simple. She would walk past a window or a basin or the brass lanterns polished to a dull shine, and there she was. Her reflection. But never quite in sync. Always just a breath behind. Always blinking a little slower, breathing a little deeper like someone underwater. She tested it. Over and over. Lifted her hand. Turned her head. Blinked. Sometimes the delay was a heartbeat. Sometimes it was more than 3 full seconds. And once, for the briefest moment, the reflection didn't move at all. Just stared. She stopped checking the larger mirrors after that. She covered the one in her bedroom with a cloth. She avoided the still puddle by the front path. But the reflections found her anyway. In the glint of a spoon. In the panes of the greenhouse where the herbs were left to die. In the sheen of her own dark hair when she caught it from the corner of her eye. She saw herself again and again, watching her with a look she couldn't describe. Not curiosity. Not even malice. It was hunger. Quiet, patient hunger. Like the way the forest watched when you wandered too far from the path. Mistress Salome had grown sick. It wasn't a sudden illness. It was the kind that settled low and slow, in the bones, in the breath. Her color was wrong. Her hands shook. She no longer spoke to Nari, only left notes. But even the notes had begun to slant strangely, the ink running toward the page's edges as if trying to escape. One evening, Nari found her aunt on the floor of the cellar, surrounded by books and melted wax, whispering to a cracked mirror she'd placed in a circle of salt. Nari didn't interrupt. She simply turned and walked back upstairs. She didn't ask what was being said. She already knew. That night, the reflection moved first. She had been brushing her hair in the dark, using only the moonlight that slipped in through the one remaining crack in her boarded window. She had lifted her brush, yawned, let the strands fall down her shoulder. And then she saw it. The girl in the mirror raised her hand before Nari did. Not a fraction of a second before. A full moment. Enough to mean something. Nari froze. The reflection didn't. It smiled, small, faint but certain. Then it leaned slightly closer to the glass, placed a hand against the surface and waited. Nari's chest tightened. The brush slipped from her fingers, thudding softly against the floorboards. She stood. Crossed the room in 5 slow steps. Her face looked back, serene. Unmoving. She lifted her own hand. Not to wave. Not to test. Just to see. When her palm met the glass, she expected cold. And at first it was. But after a moment, No, not quite a moment. She realized something else. The glass itself was cold. But the reflection's hand was warm. Not heat through glass. Not warmth like a memory. This was real, alive. Pressing. Nari's fingers trembled. She wanted to pull back, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, her brow nearly touching the glass. "I see you," she whispered. The reflection said nothing. But its lips curled, not in a smile but something deeper. Understanding. Familiarity. Like a long-lost sister leaning out from a dream. The next morning, her face had changed again. Not dramatically. The differences were subtle but undeniable. The corners of her mouth tilted upward when she wasn't speaking. Her irises had gone darker still, so dark now they looked like ink had been dropped into them. And her skin shimmered faintly under candlelight, like something beneath the surface was shifting. She watched herself eat breakfast in a silver spoon and saw her reflection chewing just a little too slow. And when she whispered to it, "Why now?" she was sure she saw it blink. Mistress Salome no longer left her food. The trays stopped coming. So Nari began to cook for herself, pulling flour from jars, dragging water from the well out back. She lit fires in the hearth the old way, not with matches but with breath and will. And the flames obeyed. One evening, as she poured water into a pot, she caught her reflection in the metal. The girl in the water was smiling. Full. Hungry. And for the first time Nari smiled back. "You're not trapped, are you?" she said aloud. The reflection tilted her head. "You were waiting." A soft knock at the window startled her. She turned. Nothing. But the window pane bore the faint outline of a hand. Pressed for just a second from the inside. She did not sleep that night. Not out of fear. Out of anticipation. What came next? In the deep quiet, she lay in bed with the mirror uncovered, watching the girl inside sleep with her eyes open. She whispered secrets. The reflection mouthed them back. Some nights she laughed. Other nights she wept. Once she asked, "What will you do if I let you out?" The girl in the mirror only blinked. Slowly. Lovingly. She didn't answer. But Nari already knew. The answer was simple. The reflection would not take her place. It would become her. Because, in some way, it always had been. By the end of the week, the changes were no longer deniable. When she smiled, strangers crossed themselves. When she spoke, birds went silent. When she passed the chapel again, the priest looked up once, clutched his robe, and shut the door before she could get close. In the mirror, her other self had grown bolder. She moved more freely now, even when Nari wasn't in front of the glass. Sometimes she walked to the edge of the frame and looked out like she was studying the boundaries. Sometimes she pressed her face right up to the glass as if listening. Once she turned her back to Nari entirely. And what Nari saw carved down the spine of her reflection's neck made her breath freeze in her chest. A mark. A shape that pulsed. She stepped back. Her own neck throbbed. She ran to the basin, splashed water onto her skin, pulled her collar down. Nothing. No mark. But her skin itched for the rest of the night, and the mirror girl smiled without looking back. Mistress Salome tried to burn the mirror 2 nights later. Nari woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of muttered curses. She ran into the hall, following the flicker of firelight, and found her aunt kneeling before the hearth, dragging the mirror across the stones with a rusted blade in one hand and a jug of lamp oil in the other. "You don't understand," Salome said. "You don't know what that thing is." "She's me," Nari said calmly. "She's what they split off. She's what your mother died to keep silent." Nari stepped forward. The reflection inside the mirror leaned toward the firelight. "You don't have to be afraid of her," Nari said. "I'm not." "You should be," Salome rasped, eyes wide. "She was born in silence. She lived in the dark, fed on your breath, your shadow. Every time you looked away she got stronger. She waited for me. She waited for your body. Your place in the world." Nari stepped between her aunt and the flames. The mirror flickered beside her. "She isn't replacing me," Nari said. "She's the part one needed." Salome dropped the blade. It clattered against the stone, old metal against old grief. "You don't understand what you're opening," she whispered. Nari looked at the mirror. "I think I do." She carried it back to her room that night. Set it on the wall. Lit candles on either side. The diary was almost invisible, wedged between 2 broken floorboards beneath a tower of rust-webbed trunks. Nari discovered it by accident while searching the forbidden room for blankets. The wind had shifted, and every window in the house leaked cold. She tugged the planks apart with the edge of a candle holder and felt her fingers close around something small and wrapped in oilcloth. When she unwrapped it, the cloth tore like old skin, and a faint smell of cedar and dust rose into the air. It was a book, slender and unadorned, bound in calfskin so dry it flaked beneath her thumb. No title, no embossing, just a single brass clasp that snapped open with a sigh. She expected brittle pages filled with cramped handwriting. Instead, she found nothing at all, sheet after sheet of blank, yellowed paper, the fibers mottled by time but empty of ink. Even the flyleaf was bare. Yet the binding felt weighted, as though the book carried stories too heavy for ink alone. She closed it, opened it again, flipped to the middle. Still blank. A trick, perhaps, or some half-finished journal abandoned by a servant decades earlier. She slid the diary under her arm, meaning to return it later, and climbed the spiral stairs back to her chamber. The wooden steps groaned in the hush. Every sound in the old house seemed louder since the mirrors had woken. Mistress Salome was nowhere to be seen. A relief, and a worry. Her aunt had begun disappearing into the cellar for hours, her footsteps dragging like chains across stone. Nari felt the absence now, its shape in the air, but she did not seek her. Instead, she set the diary on her desk, lit 3 candles against the growing dark, and sat. The blankness bothered her. She wet the nib of a pen in ink, thinking to test the paper, but something, instinct or the echo of her reflection's smile, made her stay the nib. She pricked her left thumb with the needle she kept for mending. A bead of blood welled and trembled. She let one drop fall to the center of the first page. The page drank. The blood vanished like rain on parched earth, leaving no stain. Then, faintly, a line of words rippled across the fibers, rising the way letters emerge from invisible ink held over a flame. The script was elegant, curved, unlike any penmanship she had seen in the house. I begin this record in the year 1825, on the eve of my 17th summer. My name is Nari. The candle hissed. Nari inhaled, heartbeat hammering. She turned the page, pressed another drop from her thumb, and watched sentences bloom across the sheet. They say the house is haunted by its own shadow, but I have found the shadow is mine. I hear her at night, humming, waiting, breathing where no body stands. The lines ended. Nari wiped her thumb and pressed again. Inkless words unfurled. Today my aunt warned me again. Never open the door at the hall's end. Yet I feel its cool breath when I sleep. The mirror room calls. I think my mother knew of it. She died with a mirror shard in her fist. Nari's vision swam. She pressed harder, coaxing a thin smear of crimson. More text appeared. I've seen a smile I do not wear. The pulse in her thumb ached, but she could not stop. Page after page, drop after drop, the diary filled itself, telling a life that felt uncannily parallel. A lonely child, an austere aunt, a forbidden door that hummed in the dark. The girl wrote of reflections that lagged, of villagers who crossed themselves, of a mirror that offered warmth through glass. It was her story, but shifted in time, as if some current beneath the years carried the same events to shore again and again. Yet there were differences, echoes out of step. The diarist spoke of a brother lost in the well, of bells that rang backward at dusk, of a silver lark that died and rose 3 nights in succession. Nari knew none of these things, but each detail throbbed with a truth she could feel in her teeth. She came to an entry dated the 14th day of monsoon, 1825. My aunt has begun locking my door. I wake with wax seals on the latch and salt across the threshold. She fears what grows in my face, but I am no longer afraid. Tonight I will go to the mirrors. If this be my last writing, know that I enter willingly. Nari's candle guttered. Wax spilled down the copper holder. She read on. I have carried a shard with me hidden in cloth. They say if blood meets its twin in glass, the path opens. I will cut my palm and press against her. If she takes my hand, we will be one voice again. A splatter of ink, no blood, dotted the margin as though the pen had trembled. Then a final line, thin and slanted. Remember me, whoever follows. The diary ended there. The remaining pages stayed mute no matter how much blood she offered. They seemed to recoil, fibers closing against the drop. Nari closed the cover with shaking hands. A century ago, another Nari had walked the mirror's edge and vanished. And now she sat here, her own skin singing with the same call. A click sounded beyond her door. She startled, snuffing 2 candles. Footsteps creaked down the corridor, lighter than Mistress Salame's. Childlike. Nari opened the door a slit. The hallway was empty, but cold air drifted from the distant black door. The hum she knew so well thrummed like a heartbeat at the threshold of hearing. She slipped into the corridor, diary clutched to her chest, thumbs still bleeding. Each step felt rehearsed by memory, not her own. As she neared the door, she saw that it was not fully shut. just as the diarist had described. A sigh of mist coiled at the seam, exhaling as if the room within breathed. Her fingers brushed the wood. It felt neither warm nor cold but alive, like muscle beneath thin skin. She pushed. The door swung open without protest. Candlelight from her desk did not reach this place, yet she saw clearly, the circular chamber of mirrors exactly as she remembered, but dustless now, glistening as though polished for a ceremony. In each panel stood a version of herself, but for once they moved in perfect unison, as if awaiting her cue. She stepped to the center. The diary pulsed against her ribs. She opened it to the blood-written page. Breeze, impossible indoors, turned the leaves until the final entry lay bare. The blot of blood in the corner shimmered, fresh and wet though it was 100 years old. Instinct guided her hand. She pressed her bleeding thumb to the stain. A tremor rippled through the glass walls. All around, the reflections blinked out of sync, then stilled, then began to smile, every one of them the same slow widening of lips. She drew the shard of mirror from her pocket, the piece she had stolen weeks ago from the cellar. Without hesitation she sliced her palm. Blood welled hot and vivid. She placed the wound against the nearest mirror. It should have been cold. Instead, warmth flooded her skin, pulsing to the beat of another heart. The glass softened. Her hand sank until her wrist vanished past the surface. She felt fingers curl around hers, familiar, firm, welcoming. Her mirror self stepped forward, merging limb with limb. Pain flared, bright and clean like a violin string plucked too tight, and then it became something else, certainty. Images burst behind her eyes. 2 girls, 1 century apart, both named Nari, both walking the same corridor, both drawing the same breath. She felt the older Nari's memories flood her, running through fields of indigo, whispering to moths that drank tears, standing under black rain that smelled of iron and roses. She felt the loneliness, the hunger for completion, the fear that she would always be only half a song. The warmth spread up her arm, across her chest, through her throat. Every mirror brightened as though dawn rose inside glass. Each reflection glowed, then melted inward, streaming toward the panel that held her bleeding hand. They converged in a swirl of silver and shadow, coiling into the body half emerged from the mirror. Light flared. The room thundered with a sound like distant surf. And then silence. Sudden, profound. Nari opened her eyes. Only one reflection remained, standing calmly in the mirror before her. It copied her perfectly, no delay. She lifted her healed palm. The mirror Nari lifted hers at the same instant, and they touched glass skin to glass skin, warmth equal on both sides. She felt whole, yet more than whole, as though the missing chambers of her heart had grown back, stronger than before. The diary slipped from her other hand and hit the stone floor with a soft thud. Pages fluttered. Where blood had once unveiled ink, now the paper blazed with solid black script, every line visible without wound or offering. She glanced down. The words rearranged themselves, forming new sentences that glowed dull red. The girl who vanished was never gone. She waits in every shard, in every unanswered echo. She is the key in the door and the name. Shizu. A tremor ran through the house, gentle as a cat stretching. Somewhere distant, she heard timbers settle, locks give way, windows sigh open to the night. The ancestral home was exhaling a century of held breath. From the corridor came the faint clap of footsteps. Her aunt or perhaps villagers emboldened by rumor, but Nari did not move. She reached forward again, and this time her hand passed through the mirror's skin like mist, painlessly, naturally, as though the boundary were no more than curtain. The reflection stepped out to meet her. 2 bodies, 2 souls, yet one pulse between them. The air smelled of rain on stone, of iron and roses, of pages turned by ghosts. She felt neither fear nor haste. The diary's words rang in her mind. A record begun in 1825, now complete in 2025. A circle closed. She looked back only once, to the doorway and the long hall beyond. Candlelight flickered there, timid and mortal. Then she turned to her twin, nodded, and together they walked into the glass, into the room behind all mirrors, leaving the diary cooling on the floor, its ink still shifting, writing still living, waiting for the next hand brave enough to bleed. The forgetting began quietly. At first, Mistress Salome would pause too long before saying Nari's name. She'd squint as if trying to place her in a crowd, her lips moving without sound. Then she started using strange titles, child, girl, you there, each colder than the last. Nari noticed but said nothing. She had grown used to being a stranger even in her own skin. Then came the afternoon when Salome passed her in the hallway without a glance. She didn't just look through Nari. She flinched. As though the sight of her sparked something she couldn't name, like seeing your own shadow move in a direction you didn't. That evening, Nari set the table as usual. 2 bowls. 2 spoons. She stirred the porridge with one hand and watched the doorway waiting. Her aunt appeared just as the flame began to dim, and when she entered, her eyes went wide. "You," she whispered, clutching the wall. "Who are you?" Nari turned slowly, the wooden ladle still in her hand. "You know who I am." Salome shook her head. "No. No, no, no." Her eyes were softer. Quieter. "You look like her, but you're not her." Nari stepped closer. "Then who do you think I am?" Her aunt began to tremble. "A visitor," she said. "You must be a guest. Passing through. That's all. I've lived here since I was a child." "No," Salome said, shaking her head harder now. She was a child. "You, what are you?" Her voice cracked on the last word as though it cut her throat to say it. She backed away from the table, eyes never leaving Nari's face. "You're wearing her like a dress." Nari's heart didn't race. It had long since learned not to. "Why are you afraid of me?" she asked, her voice low. Salome stumbled into the corner of the room, breath ragged. "You opened the door," she whispered. "You touched the mirrors. I told you never to open that door, never to look at what looks back. You already knew I would." Salame's hands clawed at her own chest. "She got out," she muttered. "I locked her in. I sealed her with salt and prayer and silence. But she got out." Nari stared at her. "You mean me?" The old woman's head jerked toward her. "No," she spat. "No, no, you're not her. Not anymore." Nari felt something shift behind her ribs. Not anger. Not sorrow. Recognition. Mistress Salome collapsed into the chair with a sudden gasp, as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. She clawed at the edge of the table, eyes wide and wet. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then she screamed. A single word. She. The rest never came. She slumped forward, knocking over her untouched bowl. Steam rose from the spilled porridge, silent and curling like the last of a breath. Nari stood motionless, watching the old woman's body sag into itself. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply whispered to the empty room, "You were right." She touched her own chest as if to feel what had changed. The skin was warm. The heartbeat steady. But she knew. Somewhere behind her reflection, something had passed through the glass. Something had stepped fully into her place. And now, even her aunt could not remember the line between them. The house greeted her with silence. Not the heavy, ancient hush she had known before, but something more final. Something sealed. The air no longer moved. The floorboards no longer creaked. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Nari stepped across the threshold and felt the pressure change. Like stepping into water. The light dimmed behind her without a single cloud in the sky. She knew where she was going. The mirror room called her like a memory she hadn't made herself. She passed the hallway where her aunt once whispered, past the parlor with its lifeless hearth. Her footsteps made no sound. Only her pulse followed her now, thudding louder the nearer she drew to the end of the hall. The door to the mirror room stood closed. Dust lined its edges like fur. She hesitated just once, then pushed. It groaned open, reluctant. And what waited inside stole the air from her lungs. The mirrors were broken. Shards littered the stone floor in jagged constellations. Some had spiderweb cracks blooming from unseen impacts. Others lay in piles like fallen teeth. It was as if a storm had swept through the room and smashed every reflection except one. At the center of the far wall, one tall mirror still stood, untouched. And behind the glass, Nari froze. It was her. Her true face. Her old face. Not the one that made strangers shiver or made windows darken when she passed. The one she remembered from before the diary, before the key, before the blood. The girl behind the glass was pale and wide-eyed, palms flattened against the surface, mouth moving in a scream too silent to hear. The girl in the mirror was trapped. Nari took a trembling step forward. The mirrored girl matched it, but she didn't mimic. She wasn't delayed. She wasn't imitating. She was pounding. Frantic. Mouth-forming words Nari couldn't hear but knew in her bones. "Let me out." Behind her, something shifted. She turned sharply, and the air changed. Heavier now. Waited. A glint caught her eye. One of the shattered mirror pieces showed her reflection. But the face was wrong. Smiling. Grinning wide with 2 white teeth. Not her smile. Not her mouth. She stepped closer. The reflection didn't blink. It held its grin like a mask fused to its skin. The smile stretched too far, too hungry, and the eyes behind it gleamed with triumph. Her blood chilled. She turned back to the last unbroken mirror. The girl inside was sobbing now, fingers smeared with red. She slammed her fists against the glass again and again. Her eyes locked with Nari's, pleading. And suddenly Nari understood. She wasn't looking into the room anymore. She was looking out. She staggered back, looked around. All the shards reflected the same thing. Her body still standing, still wearing her clothes but smiling. Moving without her. Every broken piece captured the new her. Slightly off, slightly wrong, wearing her face like a mask pulled too tight. She looked down at her own hands. They were pale. Transparent at the edges. No breath fogged the air. No pulse trembled in her wrist. She turned to the mirror, pressed her hands against it. The surface was solid. Unmoving. Ice cold. On the other side, her body, that thing, tilted its head and smiled wider. Then it turned, slowly, and walked out of the room. Out of the house. Out of her life. And Nari screamed. But no sound escaped the glass. The house had been empty for years. The villagers didn't speak of it anymore, not directly. Children were told not to play near the gates. Mothers crossed themselves when they walked past. The fig tree had grown thick and low, roots like knuckles, and no one touched the grave beneath it. No one even said who it belonged to. But the house itself remained, stone still strong, windows still whole, waiting like something that had learned patience. Then one spring morning a new girl arrived. Her name was Adi. She was slight, sharp-eyed, and barely 17. A cousin of a cousin had inherited the estate, and Adi had come as housemaid, the only servant willing to live so far up the hill. She liked quiet places. She didn't mind shadows. The pay was good and she had no family to write her back. The housekeeper, a gray woman with a thick scarf tied always around her throat, gave her simple rules. Clean only the eastern rooms. Never go into the attic. Never step into the cellar. Never try to open the locked door at the end of the long hallway upstairs. Why? Adi had asked once, mop in hand. Because something once opened it, the woman said softly, and something else came out. So Adi didn't. Not at first. She spent her days in the east wing, dusting old shelves, folding linens, boiling water for tea no one drank. The mirrors in the house were all covered with cloth or turned to the wall. She didn't ask why. But the dreams began anyway. The first night she heard humming. Faint, low, familiar in the way lightning feels familiar before it strikes. She couldn't tell where it came from. Maybe from behind the locked door. Maybe from the cracks in the floor. The second night she heard her name. Adi, the voice whispered close to her ear. Adi, I'm here. She woke with her back damp, her heart thudding like a fist against a door. By the third night she stopped sleeping altogether. She took to walking the halls after dusk, barefoot and silent. The lamps would dim when she passed. She told herself it was wind, or age, or nonsense. But the door at the end of the hall, always locked, began to change. It would thrum gently as she neared it. Not loudly. Just enough for the air to shift. And then came the voice. Clear, quiet, and horrifyingly known. Why are you pretending? It whispered through the wood. You know me. Adi froze. She pressed her palm to the door. It was warm. Not the wood. The space behind it. And the voice said again, softly, I am you. The next morning she found a mirror uncovered in the corner of the kitchen. She hadn't touched it. The cloth had fallen, or been taken down. It was small and silver-framed. Probably nothing. She leaned over it. Her reflection stared back. But something in the eyes was wrong. Too sharp. Too alert. The kind of look you get when you've been waiting a very, very long time. She blinked. Her reflection didn't. The next night she heard laughter behind the locked door. And for the first time she realized it wasn't just one voice. It was two. One crying. One laughing. Both hers. She went back to the kitchen mirror. This time when she looked she found someone else in the corner. A girl, maybe 20, maybe older, her face half-shadowed, watching from behind the glass. Not smiling. Not weeping. Just watching. Always watching. And Adi, without thinking, whispered to the mirror, Who am I really? The girl behind the glass didn't answer. But her lips moved. And in the silence of the house, Adi thought she heard her own voice reply. Come and find out.